The silence that follows you home. There's a particular kind of anxiety that follows you home from social gatherings. You replay conversations in your head. Did that comment land wrong? Was your colleague's smile slightly forced? Did your friend seem quieter than usual after you spoke? You're not imagining things. You've sensed something real, that people don't always tell you when you've overstepped, when you've been thoughtless, when you've left a small wound. They smile, they nod, they carry on. And the resentment grows in silence. If people have slowly started withdrawing from you, they will never tell you why. But they will always have their reasons. Here's what most self-help advice won't tell you: the problem isn't that other people are too polite to confront you. The problem is that you're creating these resentments without realizing it, and Confucius understood exactly how this happens. This isn't about becoming paranoid or walking on eggshells. It's about understanding the mechanics of how we unconsciously damage our relationships, and how Confucian ethics offers a practical system for stopping it before it starts. By the end of this video, you'll understand the specific behaviors that generate hidden resentment, why our modern instincts fail us, and how Confucius's framework for harmonious conduct can transform your relationships without requiring you to become someone you're not. The damage you don't see. The invisible accumulation. Modern life has created a peculiar situation. We're encouraged to be authentic, to speak our truth, to set boundaries, all valuable ideas in themselves. But we've lost something crucial in the process: the understanding that relationships exist in a delicate ecosystem, and that our actions ripple outward in ways we rarely track. You interrupt someone mid-sentence because you're excited to share a related thought. You offer unsolicited advice because you genuinely want to help. You cancel plans because something better came up. You complain about your problems without asking about theirs. You make a joke at someone's expense because everyone else is laughing. None of these feel like serious transgressions in the moment. And that's precisely the problem. People rarely tell you the moment they start pulling away, but they remember it forever. The person you interrupted doesn't tell you they feel dismissed, they simply stop sharing as much with you. The friend whose advice you ignored doesn't say they feel disrespected, they just become less available when you need them. The colleague you overshadowed in a meeting doesn't complain, they quietly stop volunteering ideas when you're present. Modern psychology is just rediscovering what Confucius already said: small slights accumulate into character-level consequences. Dr. John Gottman's work on relationship dissolution confirms that it's the micro-moments of disconnection, the small acts of thoughtlessness, the minor dismissals, the subtle self-centeredness, that predict relationship failure far more accurately than major arguments. Why your good intentions don't matter? The fundamental issue is one of perspective. We experience our own intentions, others experience our impact. Hidden resentment is the quietest force that ruins relationships. You know you interrupted because you were enthusiastic, not dismissive. You know you cancelled because you were overwhelmed, not because you don't value the friendship. You know your advice came from care, not superiority. But the other person doesn't have access to your internal narrative. They only have your behavior, and they interpret it through the lens of how it affected them. Modern culture compounds this problem by encouraging us to prioritize our own feelings and perspectives. How do I feel? Becomes the primary question. I need to express myself. I have to honor my own needs. These aren't wrong impulses, but when they become our only compass, we lose the ability to track our impact on others. Before you think this doesn't apply to you, ask yourself, when was the last time you checked how something you said actually landed, rather than assuming your good intentions were obvious? There's also the uncomfortable truth that most people won't confront you directly. Not because they're passive-aggressive, but because social harmony often feels more important than addressing small grievances. They calculate, usually unconsciously, that mentioning your interruption or your thoughtless comment or your self-focus will create more awkwardness than just letting it go. So they let it go. Again. And again. Until the relationship subtly cools and you're left wondering what happened. What Confucius saw that we've forgotten. The architecture of human connection. Confucius didn't approach relationships as random interactions governed by individual expression. He saw them as structured systems with their own internal logic, systems that thrive under certain conditions and deteriorate under others. Here's the uncomfortable truth: almost every hidden resentment you cause comes from 3 predictable mistakes. The concept he returns to repeatedly is harmony. But this isn't the weak, conflict-avoidant harmony of simply keeping the peace. It's something far more sophisticated, a dynamic balance where relationships flourish because each person actively cultivates behaviors that strengthen rather than erode connection. For Confucius, harmony wasn't peace, it was the right proportions of behavior, the way flavors balance in a dish. In the Analects, Confucius states, in practicing the rules of propriety, a natural ease is to be prized. In the ways prescribed by the ancient kings, this is the excellent quality, and in things small and great we follow them. 1.12. Notice what he's pointing to. There's a structure, propriety, appropriate conduct, but when done well, it should feel natural, not forced. Isn't old rituals, it's the grammar of human relationships. The rules aren't arbitrary constraints, they're discovered patterns for how human relationships actually work. The 3 sources of resentment. Confucius believed resentment comes from 3 things: not seeing the other person, not truly listening, and not honoring the relationship structure. First, inattention, failing to observe what's actually happening with the other person. You're so focused on what you want to say that you don't notice they're trying to speak. You're so caught up in your own concerns that you don't register their subdued mood. If you're unsure whether this is you, count how often you finish people's sentences. Once a day? Once an hour? More? The Analects record, the master said, "I will not be afflicted at men's not knowing me, I will be afflicted that I do not know men." 1.16. This isn't false modesty. Confucius is pointing to a fundamental truth: your primary job in relationship isn't to be understood, it's to understand. When you fail at this, you inevitably cause harm. Second, self-centredness, allowing your own needs, desires, and perspectives to crowd out awareness of others. Not malicious self-centeredness, but the ordinary kind: you talk more than you listen, you steer conversations back to yourself, you make decisions based solely on your own convenience. Confucius observed, the superior man is distressed by the limitations of his ability, he is not distressed by the fact that men do not know him. 15.19. The point here isn't humility, it's about focusing on actual self-improvement rather than reputation management. Most of us have this backwards. We manage how we appear whilst neglecting how we actually behave. Third, role negligence, failing to meet the reasonable expectations attached to your position in the relationship. As a friend, colleague, family member, you occupy a role with implicit responsibilities. When you consistently underperform these without acknowledgement, resentment builds. The Analects state, let the ruler be a ruler, the minister a minister, the father a father, and the son a son. 12.11. This sounds rigid to modern ears, but Confucius isn't demanding blind hierarchy, he's observing that every relationship has a structure, and harmony requires each person to fulfill their part well. This isn't about rigid hierarchy, it's about fulfilling the expectations attached to the role you're already in. The friend who only takes and never gives violates the structure of friendship. The colleague who consistently takes credit for others' work violates the structure of professional relationship. The 3 corrective practices. Against this analysis, Confucius offers 3 interconnected practices. 1. Reciprocal consideration. Often translated as empathy or consideration, has a more specific meaning. The character combines heart and likeness, it means treating others' hearts as like your own. Not identical, but worthy of the same quality of attention you give your own concerns. When asked for a single word that could guide conduct throughout life, Confucius answered, "Is not reciprocity such a word? What you do not want done to yourself, do not do to others." 15.24. This isn't the weak version of be nice to people. It's a rigorous practice. Before you speak, before you act, pause and genuinely consider how this will land for the other person. Not how you'd want it to land, but how it actually will, given who they are and what they're experiencing. Which brings us to a concept Confucius emphasized that modern people rarely consider: gong, respectful attentiveness. It means treating every interaction as worthy of care, no matter how small. Not because the other person is important, but because the moment itself is. This is what prevents the accumulation of small slights that become large resentments. 2. When active listening. Confucius placed enormous emphasis on listening before speaking, on understanding before responding. The character when means both to hear and to understand. In classical Chinese, truly hearing something meant grasping its significance. The master said, in hearing litigations, "I am like any other body." What is necessary is to cause the people to have no litigations. 12.13. Confucius is pointing out that his real skill isn't in judging disputes, it's in creating conditions where disputes don't arise. And those conditions begin with people feeling genuinely heard. When someone speaks to you, are you listening to understand, or listening to formulate your response? Are you catching the content, or are you also registering the emotional undercurrent? Do you make space for them to fully articulate their thought, or do you jump in the moment you've grasped the gist? Most hidden resentments begin with someone feeling unheard. If you're unsure whether this is you, try this: after someone finishes speaking, wait 3 full seconds before responding. Notice how difficult this feels. That difficulty is the measure of your actual listening capacity. 3. Self-correction through observation. Confucius didn't believe in self-improvement through abstract introspection. He believed in learning through careful observation of others, of situations, of consequences. The master said, "When we see men of worth, we should think of equaling them. When we see men of a contrary character, we should turn inwards and examine ourselves." For point 17. This is practical instruction. You don't need a therapist or a meditation practice to understand where you're going wrong. Watch what happens when someone behaves thoughtlessly. Notice the subtle shift in the room, the small withdrawal of others. That's data. Now turn that same observational capacity on yourself. When you speak, does the conversation flourish or contract? When you make a request, do people respond with genuine enthusiasm or polite compliance? When you're absent, do people seem relieved or disappointed? These patterns tell you everything you need to know about your impact. The question is whether you're paying attention. The people who can't see what they're doing. Scenario 1, the helpful hijacker. Sarah considers herself a supportive friend. When people share problems, she immediately offers solutions. She has experience, she's read widely, she wants to help, and she can see what they should do. But lately, she's noticed something: people have stopped confiding in her. Conversations stay pleasant but surface level. When she asks how are things, she gets fine, all good, even from friends she knows are struggling. What Sarah hasn't noticed, her help consistently conveys that the other person's thinking is inadequate. She doesn't ask questions to understand their perspective, she diagnoses and prescribes. She interrupts their processing to insert her solutions. She rarely says "that sounds really difficult" without immediately following with "have you tried?" Her intentions are good. Her impact is that people feel dismissed, subtly incompetent, and ultimately unheard. The resentment isn't dramatic, it's simply that given a choice, they'd rather talk to someone else. The Confucian correction, shu in practice, means pausing before offering advice to genuinely consider, is this what they're asking for? Have I earned the right to offer this counsel through first demonstrating I understand their situation? Am I speaking to help them or to display my own insight? The practice isn't to never give advice. It's to first create the conditions where advice might be welcome, which means extensive listening, careful questioning, and waiting to be asked. Before you dismiss Sarah's pattern, ask yourself, when was the last time you listened to someone's problem without offering a single solution? Scenario 2, the flexible friend. If you didn't see yourself in Sarah, wait. Marcus prides himself on being easygoing. He doesn't make rigid demands on his friendships. If he needs to cancel plans, he does. If something more appealing comes up, he's honest about it. He assumes his friends understand, he'd be fine if they did the same to him. But he's started noticing that invitations have become less frequent. His friends still respond to his messages, but they don't initiate as much. When he suggests getting together, there's often a delay before they confirm. What Marcus hasn't tracked, each cancellation, each last-minute change, each time he's chosen something else, has sent a message about priorities. Not once, dozens of times over months. His friends have concluded, not through any dramatic realization but through accumulated evidence, that they are not particularly important to him. They are not angry. They haven't cut him off. They've simply recalibrated their expectations and adjusted their emotional investment accordingly. The Confucian correction, relationships have structure, and friendship includes reliability. Appropriate conduct in friendship means honoring commitments unless genuine necessity intervenes, and even then, acknowledging the impact. The practice, treat plans with friends as seriously as professional commitments. If you must cancel, do so with genuine recognition that you're asking them to absorb the cost of your change. Don't assume they're as flexible as you'd be. Shu means recognizing that different people have different needs around reliability. Before you think Marcus is just flaky, ask yourself, when was the last time you cancelled and expected the other person to understand you automatically? Scenario 3, the well-meaning overshadower. Marcus's problem is extremely common, but the next one is even more widespread. Tom is senior in his organization and genuinely wants to develop his team. In meetings, when junior colleagues present ideas, he builds on them enthusiastically. He can see possibilities they haven't considered, connections they've missed. He wants to demonstrate what good thinking looks like. Recently, he noticed that his team members have become quieter in meetings. They still complete their work, but they've stopped volunteering ideas. When he asks for input, there's an awkward silence before someone offers a tentative suggestion. What Tom doesn't see, every time he builds on someone's idea, he effectively takes ownership of it. The person who spoke first becomes the opening act for Tom's performance. His enthusiasm reads as domination. His additions, however valuable, communicate that their thinking wasn't sufficient. His team's resentment isn't that Tom is wrong, it's that they feel perpetually diminished, their contributions serving mainly as launching points for Tom to showcase his superior insight. The Confucian correction, role fulfillment requires recognizing what your position demands. As the senior person, Tom's job isn't to demonstrate his brilliance, it's to create conditions where others can develop and showcase theirs. The practice, when someone presents an idea, ask questions to help them develop it rather than immediately adding your thoughts. If you do build on it, explicitly attribute the foundation to them and check whether they want to pursue the extension themselves. Create space first, fill it only when genuinely invited. If you're in any position of seniority, at work, in your family, amongst friends, ask yourself, do people become more or less articulate when you're in the room? Scenario 4, the authentic expresser. Jennifer believes in emotional honesty. When she's frustrated, she says so. When something bothers her, she addresses it directly. She doesn't believe in pretending or sugarcoating. This feels healthier than the passive-aggressive behavior she grew up around. but she's noticed her partner has become more guarded. He pauses before speaking, seems to weigh his words carefully. The easy warmth of their early relationship has been replaced with something more cautious. What Jennifer hasn't recognized, there's a difference between honesty and unfiltered expression. She voices irritation the moment she feels it, without considering timing, context, or her partner's current state. She frames criticisms as just being honest without taking responsibility for how they land. Her directness is experienced as a series of small attacks. The resentment her partner feels isn't about the content of her concerns, many are legitimate. It's about the relentless nature of the expression, the absence of warmth or appreciation in between, the sense that he's constantly being evaluated and found wanting. The Confucian correction, when true hearing, includes recognizing when someone is able to receive what you have to say. Timing and manner aren't dishonesty, they're respect for the other person's capacity in this moment. Gong, respectful attentiveness, means considering not just what you need to express, but when and how it can be received. The practice, before expressing a criticism, genuinely consider, is this the right time? Have I recently expressed appreciation? Will saying this now help the situation or just discharge my own discomfort? Emotional honesty isn't diminished by thoughtful delivery, it's strengthened by it. If you pride yourself on being direct, count how many criticisms versus appreciations you've expressed in the last week. The ratio will tell you everything. What you can actually do about this. Practice 1. The pre-speaking pause. Before you speak in conversation, particularly before offering an opinion, advice, or personal anecdote, pause and ask yourself 3 questions. 1. Have I fully understood what the other person is trying to communicate? 2. Is what I'm about to say genuinely relevant to their concern, or am I redirecting to my own interests? 3. Will saying this strengthen connection or subtly center myself? This isn't about never speaking. It's about inserting a moment of genuine consideration where there's usually automatic response. The pattern most people follow is, someone speaks, I have a reaction, I express it. Confucian practice inserts awareness, someone speaks, I have a reaction, I consider the context, I choose whether and how to express it. Start with 1 conversation per day. Choose a conversation where you typically speak freely, and deliberately practice this pause. Notice what you discover about your usual patterns. The pause itself, that 2-second gap, is where gong, respectful attentiveness, lives. It's the space where you choose impact over impulse. Practice 2. The reciprocal consideration check. Once per day, after an interaction that felt slightly off, sit with these questions. If I were the other person, how would I have experienced that exchange? Not how would I have felt if someone did that to me, but given who they are, their current situation, their relationship with me, how did they likely experience it? What did I miss about their state or needs because I was focused on my own? Write down your observations. The discipline of articulating this in writing, not just thinking about it, forces more rigorous honesty. You're training yourself to develop a dual awareness, your internal experience and your likely external impact. Most of us have only the former. Here's what you'll discover: the gap between your intentions and your impact is far larger than you think. This isn't a moral failing, it's simply data you haven't been tracking. Practice 3. Track the contraction. Start noticing when conversations contract rather than expand. This is subtle but unmistakable once you learn to observe it. You say something, and there's a microsecond of hesitation before the other person responds. The other person's body language subtly closes, crossed arms, leaning back, looking away. The emotional energy in the conversation diminishes. The other person's responses become shorter, more surface level. They redirect the conversation to something safer. These are signals that something you've said or done has created discomfort or hurt. Not dramatic harm, just enough to cause a small withdrawal. The instinct is to ignore these signals or rationalize them away. They're just tired, they're distracted. Instead, cultivate the courage to acknowledge them. I feel like what I just said didn't land well. Did I overstep? You won't always be right. But the practice of noticing and checking gradually tunes you into your impact in real time, allowing you to course correct before resentment accumulates. This is when true listening extended beyond words to include the entire context of the interaction. You're learning to hear what isn't being said. Practice for the 24-hour reflection. At the end of each day, review one significant interaction and ask: 1. Did I fulfill the reasonable expectations of my role in that relationship? 2. Did I listen more than I spoke, or at least equally? 3. Did I leave the other person feeling more valued, less valued, or neutral? Be specific. I think it went fine isn't useful. I interrupted her twice when she was explaining the problem because I was eager to offer solutions is useful. Confucius emphasized daily self-examination. The philosopher Zhang said, I daily examine myself on 3 points. 1.4. This wasn't neurotic self-criticism, it was systematic observation leading to gradual refinement of conduct. Keep a simple log. Over time, you'll see patterns, the specific situations where you consistently miss cues, the relationships where you're more self-centered, the behaviors that reliably cause others to withdraw. The log becomes a mirror that shows you what others see but won't tell you. Practice 5. The explicit appreciation practice. Resentment accumulates partly because the ratio of positive to negative interactions has drifted too far towards the negative. You're not necessarily doing more harmful things, you've just stopped doing as many affirming ones. Once per day, explicitly express appreciation to someone in your life. Not generic praise, you're great, but specific recognition of something they've done that had positive impact. I noticed how carefully you listened when I was working through that problem yesterday. You didn't jump to solutions, you helped me think it through. That really mattered. This isn't manipulation or relationship maintenance. It's the active practice of recognizing and acknowledging the value others bring, which you usually receive without conscious appreciation. The guideline: for every piece of critical feedback or expression of your own needs in a relationship, there should be at least 5 genuine expressions of appreciation or recognition. Modern psychology confirms this. Gottman's work on relationship ratios, but Confucius understood it intuitively. Harmony requires consistently more positive than negative input. If you can't think of 5 things to appreciate for every one criticism you offer, you're already creating resentment faster than you're building goodwill. Why this works? The accumulation effect. Understanding why these practices work requires understanding how resentment actually forms in relationships, and why it so often stays hidden. Psychological research on relationship dissolution reveals something counterintuitive: major conflicts are rarely what end relationships. Instead, it's what researchers call the small relationship maintenance behaviors, or rather, their absence. Each small thoughtlessness, the interruption, the cancellation, the self-centered conversation, creates what we might call a micro-rupture in connection. Individually, these are too small to address. The cost of confronting you about interrupting once feels higher than the harm caused. But micro-ruptures accumulate. After dozens of interruptions over months, the other person hasn't kept track of each individual instance, but they have an overall feeling about conversations with you: exhausting, diminishing, unsatisfying. The resentment isn't attached to any one event, it's embedded in the pattern. This explains why you can't see it coming. From your perspective, there's been no major conflict. Each individual incident seemed minor. But you've been tracking events, they've been tracking patterns. Confucian practice prevents accumulation. By attending to each interaction with awareness, with gong, you catch and correct the micro-ruptures as they occur. The relationship never accumulates enough negative weight to shift the overall pattern. The interpretation gap. Here's the fundamental asymmetry: you experience your intentions, others experience your behavior. You know you interrupted because you were excited, not dismissive. You know you cancelled because you were overwhelmed, not because you don't care. You know your advice came from genuine concern, not superiority. But the other person doesn't have access to your internal narrative. They only have the pattern of your behavior, and they construct an explanation that makes sense of that pattern. After being interrupted repeatedly, they conclude, "He doesn't really value what I have to say." After multiple cancellations, "I'm not actually a priority to her." After unsolicited advice, "She thinks my judgment is poor." These aren't unreasonable interpretations. They're the most logical explanations for the pattern they're observing. Shu, reciprocal consideration, directly addresses this gap. By training yourself to consider how your behavior will actually be interpreted, not how you hope it will be, you begin to see yourself from the outside. You close the gap between intention and impact. The permission structure. Most people won't tell you directly when you've caused harm because the social cost of confrontation often exceeds the harm itself, at least initially. Think about the calculation they're making: if I mention that he interrupted me, I risk seeming petty, creating awkwardness, damaging the relationship. Easier to just let it go this time. This is rational risk assessment, not passive aggression. The problem is that this time becomes a pattern. Each instance of not saying something makes the next instance harder to raise, because now they've let it go before, and adds to the accumulated resentment. Confucian practice removes the need for them to raise it. By developing the observational capacity to notice when conversation contracts, when someone withdraws slightly, when your impact differs from your intention, and by having the courage to check in the moment, you create permission for honesty. I feel like what I just said didn't land well. Did I overstep? This question does several things. It shows you're paying attention, it demonstrates you care about impact, and it gives explicit permission for honest feedback. The cost of speaking up has just dropped dramatically. Over time, this changes the entire dynamic. People begin to trust that you can handle honest feedback, which means small issues get addressed when they're still small. The reciprocal positive cycle. The mechanism works in both directions. As you practice shu, wen, gong, and observational self-correction, something shifts, you become genuinely more pleasant to interact with. Not because you're suppressing yourself or walking on eggshells, but because you've reduced the frequency of thoughtless behavior. You interrupt less. You listen more carefully. You fulfill commitments more reliably. You express appreciation more regularly. The other person experiences this as feeling more valued, more heard, more respected. They're not conscious of why, they just notice that interactions with you leave them feeling better. This creates a reciprocal positive cycle. They're warmer towards you, which makes you more relaxed and generous towards them, which deepens their warmth. The relationship begins to thrive not through dramatic interventions but through the steady accumulation of thousands of small moments of genuine consideration. This is what Confucius meant by harmony. Not the absence of disagreement, but a dynamic system where both people's conduct actively strengthens rather than erodes the relationship. The deeper structure, why awareness precedes virtue. But there's one more problem, and this is the hardest part to accept. There's a deeper mechanism at work here that Confucius understood but rarely made explicit. Genuine virtue isn't a matter of will or intention. It emerges from accurate perception. Most people think the sequence is, decide to be better, try harder, succeed. But this rarely works, which is why New Year's resolutions fail and good intentions accomplish little. Confucius observed a different sequence: learn to see accurately, natural correction follows. The person who genuinely perceives how their interruptions affect others doesn't need to try not to interrupt. The behavior spontaneously diminishes because continuing it now creates internal dissonance. This is why Confucian practice emphasizes observation over willpower. You're not trying to suppress bad impulses, you're training more accurate perception. Once you can genuinely see your impact, not theoretically, but viscerally, in real time, your behavior shifts without enormous effort. The practices outlined here are fundamentally perceptual training, learning to see the micro-signals of others' responses, learning to track patterns rather than isolated incidents, learning to experience the other person's reality alongside your own. This is harder than willpower-based self-improvement, because it requires genuine humility, the acknowledgement that your experience of yourself differs significantly from others' experience of you. But it's also more effective, because it addresses the root cause, not that you're a bad person, but that you're operating with incomplete information. The 7-day practice. For the next 7 days, focus on one specific practice, the pre-speaking pause combined with contraction tracking. Each day. In conversations, before offering an opinion, advice, or personal story, pause. Ask yourself, will saying this strengthen connection or center myself? After conversations, note one moment where you sensed a contraction, the other person withdrawing, however slightly. At day's end, write 3 sentences. What did I notice? What did I learn about my patterns? What will I adjust tomorrow? By day 7, you'll have concrete data about your impact that you've never consciously tracked before. You'll begin to see the specific ways you unconsciously generate distance or resentment, and equally important, you'll start to see what strengthens connection. This isn't about becoming perfect. Confucius himself acknowledged, "In my dealing with men, whose evil do I blame, whose good do I praise, beyond the proper measure?" 15.25, even he had to constantly recalibrate. It's about closing the gap between your intentions and your impact, gradually, through sustained observation and honest self-correction. The question isn't whether you've been creating hidden resentments, you have. We all do. The question is whether you're willing to see it clearly enough to stop. The people in your life aren't asking you to be flawless. They're asking, usually silently, for evidence that you notice them, value them, and care about your impact on them. That's not a burden. That's the foundation of every relationship worth having. Start with one conversation. Start with one day. Start with one honest observation of where you've been missing the mark. The wisdom is already there. You just have to look.